Welcome to Blind Abilities. We'd like to introduce Geoff Eden. Geoff is a multi-talented individual, having worked for the Canadian National Institute for the Blind early on.
They asked me to open a center. We started with a couple of devices and went looking for money.
Geoff had responsibility for procuring adaptive equipment for CNIB, most notably in the early 1980s, when the technology boom burst onto the scene. Geoff worked for the City of Toronto as an accessibility consultant.
The project was handed to me at the time to look at the new stadium being built, the Air Canada Centre, where the Raptors and the Toronto Maple Leafs play their games. Accessibility was built in right from the start. There was no need to go back and redo anything.
In doing so, he helped sculpt Toronto's accessibility plan, not just for blind individuals, but for the entire disabled community. Geoff was a pioneer in the early days of the radio reading service.
My national activity is in the broadcast business. I have been a member of the board of what was then our radio reading service.
Geoff was there for the creation of the Canadian Accessibility Media Network, AMI.
We got the notion sometime in the middle of 2005 that maybe we should try a TV station. We now have the Canadian Accessible Channel.
Geoff has been an avid advocate for the blindness community. And as if that's not enough, Geoff has talent.
Yeah, I was a clunker. I played lead guitar, which just means that you get to play all of the nifty little licks. I also played overhand, not underhand. The reason I did that is that I didn't watch my buddies. When we were all learning how to play guitar, they would look at each other and watch people on TV and go and study the hand motions of other people.
So sit back and relax. Join Geoff Thompson and myself as we introduce our guest, Geoff Eden.
Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Geoff Thompson.
And I'm Pete Lane. Our guest this morning is Geoff Eden. Geoff comes to us from Canada. Suffice it to say that Geoff is a longtime advocate for the blind and the disabled community in Canada, has worked for the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, for the City of Toronto, and has many, many other philanthropic and volunteer activities, all of which we intend to touch on this morning. But now I'd like to welcome to our podcast, Geoff Eden. Good morning, Geoff. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Pete. Good morning, Geoff.
Good morning.
Our pleasure. Geoff, why don't you tell us in a pencil sketch a little bit about yourself and bring our audience up to date with who exactly is Geoff Eden?
I'm sneaking into my 70s. I was one of those ROP children post-war who the medical profession deemed oxygen to be the cure-all for preemies. I was told that I had to leave the regular school and head to the School for the Blind in central Canada in Ontario when I was 7 years old. So at 6, they sent me away. And I was there. I did my full 12 years of schooling there. When I finished, I came back to my regular high school, and we had a thing here called grade 13, which was a university prep year. I did that in a regular school, which gave me some transition for a university. I spent 4 years at Brock University, which was a local university, and I chose it because it was a smaller campus. I guess I felt intimidated by larger campuses, which was unnecessary. I was a pretty reasonable cane traveler at the time. I left that university and went directly into a job with the Institute for the Blind in Toronto at their head office. And they found a spot for me teaching young, newly blinded men. That expanded to all kinds of areas. But basically, it was an adjustment to blindness course. When I completed that, they thought I was material for management, so they pushed me out into the field. And I first went to Ottawa for a year of hardening up, and then off to the Great North to operate an office there for a number of years. I came back to Toronto to operate their job placement program. That was a tough couple of years. It was the early 80s when things were very challenging economically for everybody. Somebody found out that I was relatively mechanical. I had always repaired my own cars. My father was a mechanic. We had a service center that was the family business. I was permitted virtually to do anything. And somebody found that out, and they suggested they needed to start a technical department because, as we all know, around 1983 came the Apple with its capabilities with the Echo and Braille Edit and other such programs. They asked me to open a center. We started with a couple of devices and went looking for money. We found quite a bit of money, and they gave me a budget. So I went out to TSI and bought all of the current technology which they had to offer. And that, of course, by that time, we'd moved to the VersaBraille 2, and we'd moved to the hard VERT, and then we moved to soft VERT and other such devices. So I had quite a selection. I strove not to leave out the ordinary person who didn't want the technical devices. So we filled the center with every device that seemed to be helpful, with Braille rulers, with any device that would beep. So there was quite an array of devices, and people could come in and browse them at their will and then look toward purchasing them. So it wasn't a store. I felt very strongly about confusing the store with the center where you could look at things and just play with them. I finally was confined to doing the computers alone, and we left the store function go its own way. I guess we began with a business vision, and Ron from Ohio had his earliest IBM PC program. We brought that on board, and we purchased, some synthesizers, and all of us had to learn it as we went. So by the time we got into 1990 or so, as many would recall, we had the IBM screen reader. We had Slim, the Canadian version of a screen reader. And of course, we had VERT and Arctic Business Vision. So knowing 4 screen readers was a little bit of a mind buster. 1991, a position became available with the City of Toronto, and the money was enticing. So have I lost you?
No, absolutely not. Fascinating.
All right. I left the Institute for a job with the city that was to be an accessibility consultant, essentially. I began there, and they gave me the management of a committee that was a large staff committee with the senior people of all departments, 14 at the time, actually. We worked on different strategies to make the city move toward being more accessible. We had plenty of advocacy help from the community, and we ultimately turned that committee into a community-centric committee rather than staff-centered. That began as an early model for other committees that developed in other major centers across the country. So it wasn't so much the model as setting the theme for cities to develop an interest in making themselves more accessible. And of course, we moved through an advocacy period where we finally developed a law in Ontario that was in many respects similar to your legislation, that all city and community facilities should be made accessible by the year 2025.
The ADA in America.
Yes, here we are only 7 years away from that. We're making our way, but every step is more and more difficult. To find other things that require costly repair rather than just simple fixes. I've brought to your attention that issue specifically because we have many old downtowns, both in the US and here in Canada, where we have narrow sidewalks and we have buildings that were built on a foundation that was often 30 inches high in order to permit basement windows and such, and to keep the building up off the ground to avoid flooding and other such calamities, and keep vermin out, of course. So every store had steps up to it, and still does. So my job did move into the area for people with physical disabilities along with blindness. At the city, I moved everybody along through different versions of Zoom text, and we went from Arctic Vision to JAWS as Windows 95 and 98 moved into us, and I had to do some instructing, but primarily we set up a committee that had fairly major fund to oversee any issue around accessibility for employees. One of the interesting ones was the center where dispatching was done. We found that the chairs were breaking. Men and women sitting in there all day dispatching tended to snack and eat and got very heavy. We had to go out and get the people at Steelcase to build sturdier chairs that revolved. Well, that kind of evolved into other things. The project was handed to me at the time to look at the new stadium being built, or the Air Canada Centre, where the Raptors and the Toronto Maple Leafs, etc., play their games. Because the city put the land up for the project, the company was instructed to make me a part of the architectural planning team right from day one. So that was very helpful. Every time a drawing came up, I had an opportunity to take it and comment on the drawing and suggest changes. So that made life easy. That accessibility was built in right from the start. There was no need to go back and redo anything. That was a long project, took a lot of energy. I had never had much to do with Stadia before, so that took some study on my part to see who was doing what. However, we wound up with a relatively accessible area with platforms for wheelchairs at several of the levels. The stadium actually has 5 levels of seating and ranges of cost, of course. We had platforms built, but they were built in the midst of the other seating so that, for example, nobody goes to the stadium alone. They go with friends. And often they go with fully able-bodied friends. So the seating needs to be nearby so you can pass your beer back and forth or your popcorn or whatever you're doing. So you're in the midst of the crowd. You're not isolated in any way. That was one thing we wanted to avoid. The door sets all have, of course, power-operated doors, no matter where you come into the center. And the story I was telling Pete earlier, which was fascinating, the original design for the center dug a bowl in the ground. Of course, the stadium goes down into the ground to create the banking around the play area. And when the design came up, it was going to be 8 inches high so that the sidewalk along what happened to be its eastern wall was 8 inches up from the ground. And there was another city sidewalk that was 8 inches below. Now, you can imagine hundreds of people trying to walk along with a sidewalk that's a step up and a step down in their midst. So, of course, I rejected that plan, and I said, it's going to cost us a fortune. I said, well, that just doesn't make any sense. If you've got lots of money to pay lawsuits, that's up to you. Well, they had to go back, and they'd actually put some concrete in and broke it up and had to dig the bowl a further 8 inches deep so that the entire facility is ground level and that sidewalk is nice and wide and level.
Very nice.
And that brings me up to retirement, if we're keeping this short pencil sketch. Prior to retirement, I joined municipal committees. I live in Niagara, and I worked in Toronto, and for quite a period I went back and forth on a bus, nearly 100 miles every day. It was too costly to even think about moving my family into the city, and we had a nice house out in the boonies anyway, so I went in every day. I wasn't alone. There was about 40 of us that boarded the bus every day, went into Toronto, and came back at the end of the day. I had a guide dog for a number of years, and my dog, faithful that he was, would sleep his time away on the bus. I had plenty of opportunity to give him 4 or 5 miles a day other than that. I ultimately went back to a cane because I went for a dog in 2002, and it didn't work. The dog just wasn't for me. And I just didn't have the time and the inclination to go back and work another new dog in. I was very busy, so I went back to using my cane. Subsequently, my MS has slowly reduced my capacity, and I walk with a support cane for much of the time now, which is really interesting because that means that my echo hearing, my echo mobility is my primary mode. And when you need that as a primary mode with a walking cane, you certainly work it hard. Noisy places, I stop and I move very carefully, but quiet places, of course, I can get along because I catch walls and doors and other things without much difficulty. The entertaining part of that is that whenever they put up wet floor signs, I seem to find them no matter what happens.
Don't we all?
So the wet floor sign is my enemy. So here I am many years later, an apartment dweller at the moment. My committees, we have taken all of our local counties in the Niagara area, right from the whole Niagara Peninsula, which is sort of the main fruit growing area. Perhaps you didn't know that in Canada we grow peaches and apples and strawberries, many tender fruits here, pears, etc. Because of the moderated climate from being surrounded by the lakes, primarily Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. There's a United County committee that I sit on, and I've chaired a couple of times. And I sit on a local committee. This is the city of Welland, which is 50,000 people, and we're just southwest of Niagara Falls. I work on that committee, and I've been to a number of provincial pursuits covering the province of Ontario.
This is an AMI podcast.
I'm Kelly McDonald. Here's a segment from our show, Kelly and Company, on AMI Audio.
Today we're off to Montreal, and we have Nick D'Ambrosio on the line. Hello, Nick. What's happening in the big city of Montreal?
Well, spring has sprung, the sun is shining, and it's a beautiful day, so I'm very happy.
Just a fall back to winter, blind curling.
Yeah, it was an opportunity. It was the last day. It was an open.
My national activity is in the broadcast business. I have been, right from the early 90s on, a member of the board of what was then our radio reading service, which grew and grew and grew into multiple centers because we needed an East Coast, a Central Canada, and a West Coast reading service. And because our population is smaller, it only made sense to do it with one organization with far-flung offices. We got the notion sometime in the middle of 2005 that maybe we should try a TV station. So we worked on that and finally went to our broadcast commission and gave them a proposition that if they would let us have a few cents off of everybody's cable bill, we could finance a proposition instead of arguing for all kinds of described video concessions and such, which was getting to be tougher and tougher because of the disparate nature of the way television is delivered across the country. There's satellite, there's cable, and there's some even little cable companies that service little towns in northern communities. So they're only 200, 300 subscribers, and it got to be very difficult to talk about regulatory ways of making that work. So we thought we'd try what we called an accessible channel, and it has open description and open captioning. So you don't have to push any buttons. The danger is, of course, that it has its own programming, which does, by its own nature, confine people to getting to see what the channel can offer. That is one of its shortcomings. We opened that in 2008, and it's available across the country. We tried to get all the cable companies and the satellite people to put it in the same place. We were able to get a few of them to put it on 555 and 888, etc., but they kept shuffling things around because the industry is always moving. We now have the Canadian Accessible Channel. I've been trying to advocate to have them put it online, but I think they're so afraid that they'll contravene some of the broadcast regulations, and I think they're a little concerned that cable is their home and that they might lose control of their product out there.
Keep the conversation going off the air. Email feedback at ami.ca or connect with us on Twitter at AMI Audio and let us know what you think about our programming. A question, a comment, everything is welcome.
Look, as someone who's visually impaired, it's easier and more convenient to have...
I left the board because of that, the lack of continuing to advocate for all stations to have captioning and audio description. I say it outright that I'm a description supporter. I understand other points of view, but I think that in many cases, it reminds me particularly of movies that don't have a single word spoken in them. And there are some. The one that comes to mind was a movie called Chase, where there were some folks being chased through the jungle. And it's all about people running and chasing with spears and darts and everything else. And there's hardly a word spoken in the movie. So there are instances where some kind of description is necessary. Again, if you want to turn it off, that's your choice. But if it's there, that also is a personal choice.
So this network is the AMI network, right? Accessible Media Incorporated.
That's correct. Access Media Incorporated.
Yeah, I paid attention to a lot of those shows, and when you start talking about movies that don't have description, Castaway.
Tom Hanks, right?
Big chunk of Castaway where he's just kind of on an island doing stuff, and there's no description.
Mm-hmm. The other one comes to mind was the Japanese pilot and the American pilot who were on an island in the Pacific, just the two of them, Lee Marvin and somebody in the movie, and they scream and yell at each other and try to blow each other up, and they still continue the war, the two of them on the island. And
they were spotters, I think, for each other's military, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Again, personal choice. So AMI have grown, and one of the good things is that, of course, there are now some blind people who work there. I don't think nearly enough. I have, opinions about the stranglehold that the senior sighted management has on the process and how well they pay themselves, but that's between me and them.
Geoff, you mentioned earlier that in the 80s you started out working with trying to advocate for businesses to come on board and hire people with disabilities. And today that seems to be, kind of a two-pronged thing. You have people willing to go in through the hiring process and best make themselves available to be hired. And yet you have businesses that aren't aware of the possibilities or the abilities that people with disabilities have for their businesses.
I think we've fallen down on the job. When I was a young man, many times I was sent off to talk to kids in schoolrooms. I was sent to service clubs to speak to them time and time again. And I worked on my presentation so that it would be something that would stick in their minds. I don't think we're doing nearly enough of that. And I think that may be in part the responsibility of some of us who've had experience as blind people, maybe not pushing hard enough to get ourselves launched in so that we can carve the way for newcomers. Not current company, of course, because we're obviously all in the advocacy business, but on the part of many others. And I think that the fear of technology that has simplified many jobs and makes certain kinds of jobs redundant. So in part, It's the change of the workplace. But I think that we have not had good television commercials. There was a time when there were some terrific television commercials out there to inform employers. I remember the American Foundation for the Blind had that great movie, What to Do When You Meet a Blind Person. It may have not have been perfect, but it was memorable. And I think that's where we've slipped. And I think the organizations that we work with should look at maybe going to a high-power advertising firm where people do the thinking about how to get attention. I don't know if you've heard of Under the Influence.
You're soaking in it.
You're in good hands with Austin.
You're Under the Influence with Terry O'Reilly.
One of the most profitable categories in the world of marketing is pets. The pet supply market is huge and growing every day. The number of dogs in the U.S., for example, exceeds...
It's a show here that's operated, the CBC does it. It's been running 10 years, but it's a fellow that analyzes advertising approaches. Very, very entertaining. I do believe that we need to call out to some of the people who know how to get attention. Hence the success in past days, the cigarette industry, the people who sell you coffee, the people who sell you automobiles, the people who sell you deodorant. They know how to get attention. We need them to help us to find a way to get employers' attention.
That sounds great.
Yes, I think if we can incorporate some of the corporate world into our thinking, we do need people in boardrooms, as we know that the women's movement has had marvelous strides moving into politics and moving into boardrooms. And I think we have to take some of that model and take that with us to do the same things. They, I think, have found the right kind of expertise and have strategized with great care how to work their way into things. And I'm not sure whether we've done that. Screaming and yelling and having demonstrations and doing silly things gets attention, all right. But it's not attention in the street you want.
Right.
You want attention in the legislatures and the boardrooms. That's where you want attention.
And especially in the people who are doing the hiring, so you can change their preconceived ideas of when they see a person come in with a cane, that they just don't lock up and go into their inner monologue wondering what they can do for me. We have to change that perception that the people that are doing the hiring at that level.
Well, when was the last time you saw a good commercial on the TV with a good cane user? That was something in the past a couple of times. Commercials have even a TV show with somebody using a cane effectively. And I think people don't understand how effective a cane can be. A person who's never had to deal with outside on the longer term just simply doesn't understand how clear the world can be tactily. They just don't get it. We all know that blindness is the number one feared disability, and it's because of misunderstanding. Most people would rather lose their hearing than lose their sight. But let me assure you, hearing is the most difficult one because you lose your ability to be amongst other people, to have good relationships. People who are very hard of hearing and deaf wind up tending to be communal. They live in communities unto themselves because they themselves can communicate effectively with each other. Crossing the barrier to English speaking is very difficult for them.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. And I think we should emphasize the role that technology is now playing and has for a number of years now in our abilities to be assuming mainstream jobs typically performed by sighted people. Technology is obviously a key.
Oh, indeed. The iPhone and its brothers and sisters have gone miles along. I don't want to short the Android folks who also work very hard at coming along with their accessibility, but I'm an iPhone user, not a deep user, but the things I get from it are things I need very much.
Can't read it, you can't read Braille. I just want to say, before saying the winner, that we need to make every single thing accessible to every single person with a disability.
Can you mention getting the word out there for like someone famous or something? Stevie Wonder, he was on a award show and he mentioned Braille and he mentioned accessibility, and there's been other approaches to that where they had the Wizard of Oz, a girl giving a description of what she thought everything looked like. She said, and Dorothy looks like me. It was really cute.
I think about the shape.
A funnel-shaped tornado swirls.
I think about color.
Green.
I also think about sound.
A girl who is blind imagines.
I take it into my brain and I think about, what would it look like to me?
She imagines a skinny tin man in a field.
My tin man has a big toe the size of a house.
She imagines herself in the movie.
And that's Dorothy. She looks like me.
They all walk together on a yellow road.
Everyone has a favorite movie. Now, people with visual disabilities can find theirs. Comcast is proud to introduce the first talking guide.
That goes a long ways. That's huge. And yet, here it's been 2-3 years, and there hasn't been a continuation of that.
I think we need to maybe get Hollywood's attention. There's so much that can happen in a movie that goes deeper than just a commercial, where you can tell a real story. We've had a couple of instances like that, but I think if we could get the attention of a good writer and come up with a character or a storyline that is compelling, that gets people's attention. Not sure if I've got all of the right strategies because I don't claim to know, but how many of us have turned up at HR conventions?
Right. And that's probably a spot that a panel of people with disabilities could be heard very well.
Yeah, we need to find the right people, too. We need to find the articulate ones that are competent. I think we have to be very careful not to appear to be overzealous because, as we all know, that sometimes doesn't sell.
That destroys the message.
So we need to cultivate in our midst people with sophistication and aplomb to approach people. And the other hardship, of course, for us is the perpetual cocktail party. There is nothing more difficult to work in the world than a cocktail party.
As a blind person.
As a blind person.
Exactly, because it's just commotion. There's no sidewalk. There's no guidance.
And a room full of strangers.
And a lot of noise.
And you're not sure if you're engaging them, you can catch their attention or not. I think we folks who have worked in rehab should maybe work on some schemes for that. But right from my very earliest days working in rehab, we always had conversations about house parties and service club meetings and how you would work that, making sure that people knew you were there and that maybe somebody would introduce you so that you had a couple of groups to talk to, and to have the courage to get up and move to the next table and insinuate yourself into the conversation. That's hard to do.
When I got involved in advocating for higher education, I couldn't make out people from 5 feet away. So every time we did lunch, I'd turn around and there were 80 tables out there with over 200-300 people, and I would sit with every month a different table. Well, when the election came up, they all knew me because I would sit at a table of 12, a table of 3, a table of 5, 1. So I ended up inadvertently mingling with, I would say over half the people. So when name recognition came up for the election, it was, that's that one guy, the blind guy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I make it a point when I go to committees and other such things to take a different chair each time, because everybody tends to go in meetings to the same chair. So if you sit in a different chair, it's going to upset somebody. You've got my chair. And people will even step up and say, excuse me, are you sure you wouldn't like to move? I think that's really important, to sit in a different place than you're engaging somebody who's new.
Excellent point.
Good point.
Today is Wednesday, May the 23rd of 2018, and we are now recording the iAccess session, which includes 6 of us here in the Jacksonville Public Library and a whole heap of people in the Knowledge Vault on the Out of Sight Network. Our general topic for discussion today is headsets, headphones, earplugs, earbuds, and the like. Geoff, why don't you talk a little bit about your computer headset?
I bought them on a whim. Middle of last week, I was in the stereo
Geoff,
store.
I first met you in the outofsight.net community. Talk a little bit about that and how you first became involved with that community.
Of course. Just briefly, I've been a VIPer for a while, and a couple of other nets that have come and gone. I went, and the games were very compelling. Enjoyed myself thoroughly and joined in with some of the chat. So I've enjoyed the camaraderie of a number of people there. I have decided that it's time that I put my oar in the water and help out, apart from buying things at the auction. Now I've decided to do a Fix-'em show. And this goes back to the days when I had a woodwork shop and my auto mechanics days and things like that that interest me. And the Fix-It show, I try to have people bring their own solutions on because everybody has a good idea. And I wanted to start out with the simple things that you can do. We don't need expertise like how do you drill a 5/16 hole and chamfer the edge so that you can sink a screw and that sort of thing. That's a little bit too complex, although it may go there, back to the days of Phil Parr and his expertise, which I was a part of. I think what we need in this thing that I wanted to do is how to do simple household things. If you get a mess, if you spill a can of cooking oil, how do you clean it up? So there's some easy things that others can bring on board. And I think that's been my contribution. I intend to bring 20 questions back. It's one of those quizzes that I always had fun with, privately and in company. So I might take a shot. If the executive sees fit, I might take a shot and run a few weeks of 20 questions and see if it catches on. But some of the games are completely absorbing.
Well, I know charades charades was always a fun thing, but that's such a visual thing.
Well, yeah, if you play charades as a blind guy, you have to check what other people are doing. A window washer would punch you in the nose.
You also do a tech session each week.
I do. I'm part of a group of 5 or 6 people. I try to bring to the table the things I have learned about computing. People run into a problem, I will answer along with my colleagues. We all have our own little sort of space of expertise, and we bring those spaces together, and we get a room full.
Geoff, you talk about teaching people and your woodworking and stuff, and I've done woodworking, and out of the classes, the people in the blindness trade did not come into the class to become carpenters, but I always felt it was successful, and this goes for the tech when you help people out, and like Pete does too with his stuff. If a person was at home and the leg of a table was wobbly and they reached underneath it, and found a wing nut a Phillips screwdriver. Because it's so easy for people that I've met in the blindness community to just say, it's broken.
Yes.
And just leave it like that. But if they investigate and try to come with a solution to it, that's success.
Absolutely. The other hardship is these days it's hard for people to come up with the money to pay for a handmade piece of furniture because it takes so much energy and so much good material.
For those folks not familiar with the outofsight.net community, we'll have a link in the show notes that will take you to an information page, and we'll also include instructions on how you too can subscribe. This is an online community with a variety of chat rooms and a variety of activities, not just games, tech forums and discussions, all kinds of things, some of which may appeal to you. So take a look at our show notes.
Wait, Willie and the Boat Boys.
Geoff, what is a grade 8 vocal diploma?
The music business in piano, vocal, and other instruments is graded. You can go to a piano teacher and you can get a grade 3, or grade 4, grade 5 certificate. If you go to a conservatory, they have different levels, and you then have to perform, and they judge your performance and give you a mark. In the schema that prevails here with the conservatory, there are the layout of grades. Grade 8, those out there who are musical, you have to have grade 2 theory, and you have to have some music history. And you need that sort of academically as your background. And then you have to perform exercises and pieces that are in accord with that level of expertise. So you understand range, you understand breathing, you understand how you form your vocal notes, etc., the way you articulate. So I walked away with the ability to, I suppose, just sing lighter melodies. So it's one of the steps on the way to having a developed voice.
And you also played guitar.
Yeah, I was a clunker. I played lead guitar, which just means that you get to play all of the nifty little licks. When no one else can understand me. I was never really hot. I was adequate, in my opinion. I also played overhand, not underhand. And the reason I did that is that I didn't watch my buddies. When we were all learning how to play guitar, they would look at each other and watch people on TV and go and study the hand motions of other people. And I just did it a way that felt comfortable to me. And I didn't play it on my lap or anything like that, as some overhand people have done. I stood up and played it, but I found this way to cope overhand. Now, there are things you can do overhand that you can't do when you use an underhand grip. But there are things with an underhand grip you can do that you can't do overhand. So it's two distinctly different ways of playing. And people used to wonder what it was all about. But I coped. I could certainly do the licks that the Eagles and some other groups would do. I was a successful copycat in that respect.
As time goes on, I realize just what you
I took seriously not copycatting everybody, though, to try and find my own way of doing it. The same thing with singing. I guess I felt strong enough in my own skills that I just didn't copycat sing. I tried to do something different with it. I was the guy that would go and learn the songs off the record and bring it back and teach the other guys the parts to the song and all the vocal parts. That was my job in the band.
Geoff Healy, he's from Canada, and he played, well, it was on his lap, but when I was sighted back then, way back, he stood up once in a while and would play the same way, that overhand style.
Geoff and we've had very brief chats. We worked downtown. He actually opened a club of his own that was just a couple blocks down the street. So I got down there on a couple of occasions. But his experience was the same. He didn't watch other people. He did it the way it felt right for him. And that's what I did. And we didn't know each other other than just to say hello. Was a virtuoso of overhand neck guitar.
Yes.
His virtuosity, just if you listen to Gently Weeps, his version of it, it's the best one.
Yeah, I've heard it.
Yeah.
Dynamite. We're speaking with Geoff Eden. Geoff has had a fascinating life in the realm of advocacy for the blindness community and the disabled community in general, and is pretty much a jack of all trades, as we're hearing. Geoff, we always ask this of our guests. As Geoff mentioned to you earlier, much of our audience lies within the realm of transition age students who are moving out of high school and looking towards college and or the workplace. What advice would you give to those blind transition age students as they migrate in that direction?
That's a period of life when many of us look at ourselves and wonder where we fit in society. We wonder whether we're going to have a lady friend. We wonder whether there's going to be a family. We wonder what the future holds for us because of often the big mountains that we seem to need to climb. I think one of the things we need to do is to concentrate on the task at the moment. Concentrate on school. I, like all young men, had lady friends and such, but make sure you concentrate on what you need to get done. Somebody gave me the advice that don't try and be a master of all arts. Pick on one or two that you think you can succeed in. That's the thing that gets people's attention. If you're good at something, I do think that you do need to continue to have a social life, or you'll be so alone and lost. If you've got some kind of musical skill, make a little bit of it so that if you go to a party, you can be one of the entertainers. I certainly enjoyed taking my guitar along to parties, and that always broke the ice for me. Playing in little combos also broke the ice for me so that I had companionship. The other advice that goes along with that is get out of the house. Get your homework done, do those things, but join a high school club, join a key club or the drama club or anything. Throw yourself in. Sure, you're going to make mistakes. Sure, you're going to look like a fool sometimes, but everybody makes mistakes, and everybody at one time or another looks like a fool. So go for it.
That's great advice. Every once in a while, my hometown is looking for the city fool, and they come to my door.
They've got it in their Rolodex, the address.
Oh, I've got a 4-letter word on my back. FOOL. There's no getting around it.
There you go. Likewise here.
Hair of gold and lips like cherries. It's good to touch the green, green, green grass of home.
Well, Geoff, we'd like to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy retirement and chatting with us here on Blind Abilities. Do you want to share any contact information for our listeners where they might reach out and touch base with you in some way?
I can do that, sir. My email, most direct means to get me. I'm not a Facebook follower because I find it eats up my day and I get angry with myself for wasting my time. So I don't do Facebook. So my email is Eden, Eden.Geoff, Geoff @gmail.com. That's Eden.Geoff @gmail.com. That's the easiest way to get me. If you care to Skype me, it's again an easy one. I just call myself Geoff Eden. That's GeoffEden, all one word. Just Geoff Eden. And those are two means by which you can reach me most readily.
Well, thank you so much. Geoff Thompson, any final words or questions?
Geoff with the Geoff. It's great talking to you. You're a very good speaker and you got a lot of information, and we're just across the border from each other, but it's just interesting to see how some of the paths are so similar.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and even boost some of my own thinking, I suppose, giving advice to those moving to high school, for example. You've been very penetrating. I hope I haven't disappointed you.
Oh, not in the least. I think not only the Canadian blindness community, but universally will learn from your comments and your experiences. And I think that Canadians in particular should be complimentary of your endeavors throughout the years and thankful for the efforts that you've made on behalf of the disabled community throughout Canada. So thank you so much. I'm sure our listeners will gain quite a bit from having heard you. Thanks again.
You're welcome and you're most kind.
This concludes our chat with Geoff Eden. We'd like to thank Geoff for sharing his story and his music with us and our listeners. For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com. We're on Twitter, and don't forget to download our free apps in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. That's 2 words, Blind Abilities. And a special thanks to Chi-Chow for his beautiful music. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.